My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. What is the relationship between faith and health? Can prayer really heal? Do believers outlive non-believers? These questions came up for me recently during a conversation with a new friend who was struggling with his health. I offered prayer and spiritual healing, and he openly admitted that he does not believe in prayer or, in fact, any form of divinity. In an effort to bring him some evidence of the power of faith, I began researching this topic and came across the work of Dr. Harold Koenig. Dr. Koenig is currently board-certified in general psychiatry and formerly board-certified in family medicine, geriatric medicine, and geriatric psychiatry, and is on the faculty at Duke University as professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences and associate professor of medicine. Dr. Koenig is director of the Center for Spirituality, Theology and Health at Duke University Medical Center and has published extensively in the fields of mental health, geriatrics, and religion with nearly 500 scientific peer-reviewed articles and book chapters and more than 40 books. His research on religion, health, and ethical issues in medicine has been featured on dozens of national and international TV news programs and hundreds of magazines and newspapers. Dr. Koenig has given testimony before the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives concerning the benefits of religion and spirituality on public health, and travels widely to give seminars and workshops on the topic. His books include The Healing Power of Faith, and his latest book is You Are My Beloved. Really? Welcome, Dr. Harold Koenig. Good afternoon, Dr. Koenig.
Good afternoon, Victor. How are you today?
Wonderful, sir, and thank you for joining us. I greatly appreciate this.
Glad to be on your show.
Dr. Koenig, I read your CV, and it read like a small book, 88 pages long. Your education, training, and practice was grounded in science and medicine. What events led you to explore the connection between religion and health?
Well, I kind of had the same experience that you did with your friend. Mm-hmm. But as a physician, that was the setting that I came across many patients in family medicine that were having a hard time in the hospital in particular, when they got sick, when they had a stroke, when they had a heart attack, when they had surgery, and they were trying to recover. Many of them were middle-aged and older adults, and I just wondered how they were coping with all that. I had been a nurse before becoming a physician, so I'd been trained to be kind of sensitive on how people were dealing with and coping with their health issues. So I asked people, I said, well, what do you do to cope? And Victor, I can't believe how consistent it was. People said their religious faith. They talked about prayer and reading the scriptures, of their faith tradition. And they said that brought them comfort and gave them hope in the setting of their illness. So I was kind of shocked by that because I hadn't had any training at all in nursing or in medical school, or certainly not in psychiatry, on the role that religion played in people's mental health or coping with illness. So that's how I got interested.
Now, did you come from a religious or spiritual background?
I came from a religious background. I was raised as a Catholic. And then, you go to high school and it loses its significance, if it ever had significance prior to that. But, and then I went to college, and then it just dropped off the map. Then medical school, you don't have time for anything. And then I started my residency in family medicine, and kabang, bad things began to happen in my life. My wife left me. I got very depressed, and I had a series of failed relationships that were very, very painful. And so all around this time, I'm taking care of patients, asking them how they cope and everything. So I guess my question to those patients was really, my own search for some way to cope with my problems. And so I figured, here are some older, many of them were older patients. And I figured, look, these people have lived their full life. Many are in their 80s, 70s, 80s. They ought to know what really works, what really helps people to cope. They've been through life. They've been through all of the difficult situations that, something probably similar to what I'm going through. What helped them to cope? And so it was my question itself. I was trying to figure out for myself, what can I do to get out of this, this depression, this sense of loss, this just not having much purpose or meaning in life. I was a physician, graduated from Stanford, went to one of the top medical schools in the country. I had everything, really, but I was just not happy. I was just not happy.
Now, when you attended medical school, what was the concept of religion and healing? Was it even broached? And what was the prevailing attitude in medicine toward faith at the time?
Well, when I was in medical school, it wasn't mentioned at all. So that it was just not mentioned. It was not thought to be relevant. Even on my psychiatry rotation, well, probably especially on my psychiatry rotation, I heard about Freud, and Freud had some really negative things to say about religion.
Yes.
So, that was about my only exposure, was that he thought it was an obsessive neurosis, and that people would be better without it, and they ought to deal with their problems in a rational way rather than believing in some kind of fantasy God.
And there was no effort to, at that time, combine the concepts, some of the Eastern philosophy of the mind, body, spirit.
Well, there might have been a little of the Eastern philosophy, because I was in San Francisco, of course, at UC San Francisco. So that was kind of a new age cauldron of ideas, and I got very involved, in fact, in some of the Eastern religions when I was a medical student. The problem is I guess I went too far with those Eastern religions. I kind of started really getting into some of the teachings of Alan Watts, and began, doing some weird stuff. And at one point, I actually had this experience that they talk about in Hinduism and Buddhism, where you actually merge and become one with the universe. And it was like it was phenomenal for about 10 seconds, maybe 20, and then it kind of crushed. It went away, and I had a panic attack and just kind of lost it. It was a bit of a deep personalization. I'm not sure how to call it, but I just it was almost kind of like a psychotic experience. I mean, the way I try to remember it now, but that was what happened, and it actually I was expelled from medical school after that. It shook me up so much I couldn't concentrate, I couldn't work, and I ended up being expelled.
Wow.
And, yeah. So anyway, so that was that.
So you literally had a dark night of the soul at that point.
It was indeed. It was a dark night, and it took 4 years for me to get back on solid ground.
Had you practiced meditation at that time?
I was trying. I was doing what I could to meditate. I was trying to bring my world back together. It just, my mind was just racing and stuff. It was not working. I was having, I just couldn't concentrate well enough to meditate. And then I was scared because of that experience that I had. I certainly didn't want to have that experience again. That was one of the most terrifying experiences I had ever had. It was both the most amazing and also the most terrifying and unsettling.
What do you attribute that to in hindsight? What do you think happened there?
I think what happened was I was reading, and I tend to be very intense in my reading. I was really get into Alan Watts's teachings, which are very, very much Buddhist, but kind of you got to have like a guru to help guide you with this stuff. And I didn't have anybody to guide me. And I just kind of went off the deep end. It was, it was just a very disorganized, I guess that's what a disorganizing experience that caused, initially my own self to kind of vanish. And, then I was lost somewhere and I didn't know how to get back. That's the only way I can put it together.
And how did you get back? What did you do to reorganize yourself?
Well, it took a while. I kind of floundered. I just floundered and eventually, got expelled, and then lived on the streets of San Francisco for about 6 months. Lived under a house and in Golden Gate Park, and just trying to survive, and just kind of barely surviving too, and slowly, gradually, joined the Army. And that was quite an experience. I lasted for 2 months in the Army.
Wow.
Anyway, that didn't work out so good. But, and then I got out on a medical discharge because I had some health problems at that time. And, then worked in a gas station and on my dad's farm and kind of then when it became an orderly. So that was the step back into medicine.
There you go. Well, you and I actually are contemporaries in terms of age and generations that we've lived in. And if you recall back then, there was an album by The Doors called The Soft Parade. And in the beginning of the song, The Soft Parade, the late, great Jim Morrison said, when I was back there in seminary school, there was a person who put forth the proposition that you can petition the Lord with prayer, which he repeats 3 times, and then he exclaims, you cannot petition the Lord with prayer. However, that's not the findings that you've had in all of your years of experience in medicine, and we'll discuss that when we come back after these brief messages on Destination Unlimited on the OMTimes Radio Network.
OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Hi, this is Sylvia Henderson, intuitive life coach and energy healer. Are you ready to elevate and rise way above your normal? Be sure to listen to my show, Intuitive Transformations, on OMTimes Radio, Sunday evenings at 9 p.m. Eastern. Get the inspiration you need to transform your life.
And we're back on Destination Unlimited. My guest this afternoon is Dr. Harold Koenig. And Dr. Koenig, before we had the break, we were talking a little bit about your experience and some of the things that you experienced in San Francisco and then your return into the medical field. So when you get back into the medical field and you graduated medical school and you began your exploration of the connection between faith and science, what were some of the initial theorems that you tested, and how did you go about testing them?
Well, I was interested in whether older adults, whether they were happier if they were more religious, and whether or not they feared death, if they feared it as much if they were religious. So that was kind of my question was, does religion help people to feel happier and experience less death anxiety when they get old and closer to death? So that was the first studies, and I did surveys and, collected data on hundreds of older adults and found that, lo and behold, there was a correlation. Those older adults who were more religious said they were happier, and they said they didn't fear death as much. So that kind of, I thought, wow, you can actually show this. You can actually document it using statistics. So that was, for me, a surprise.
Now, did your colleagues and peers have a favorable view of your early work?
No, they didn't. They did not. I thought it was very interesting. And, since so many patients were telling me religion was helpful to them in coping, I thought it would be, useful for my medical colleagues to know about it. So I was in family medicine residency at the time, and they asked me to give a grand rounds. So I gave this talk, and it was on religion and coping with illness. And I got kind of a negative reception. People kind of were looking around thinking, hey, this guy ought to be talking about diabetes or hypertension or heart disease. He's talking about religion. This guy must be weird. So in any case, I got kind of the cold shoulder by my colleagues about it. But, I'm telling you, I had seen too many patients who looked me straight in the eye and told me that it was their religious faith and prayer that enabled them to survive. And there was no doctor, no colleague of mine that was gonna completely negate that. So I just thought, well, okay, I guess we need to do some more research, because research is the way medical students, doctors, and everybody in the medical profession, that's what guides them and ought to be affecting their opinion with regard to the relevance of psychosocial, cultural, or religious factors in health.
Now, of those studies, what were your findings in terms of people approaching transition, approaching death, and how they passed versus people who were not religious or had any faith base?
Well, I actually did not then pursue that among those who were getting ready to die or dying, although I can talk about that given a series of about a dozen studies on that topic at Harvard now, at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute there. But I kind of departed away from the group of people who were old and dying and started to study then people in general, although kind of focused on older adults. So our initial findings were that not only were older and middle-aged adults who were more religious, not only did they have greater well-being, but also they had less depression. And that was something I was really interested in because I had now transitioned over to Duke. And so, one study after the other began to show that religious people were just less depressed. They coped better with illness and stress. They had less anxiety. And I thought, well, this might actually influence their physical health as well. If they're not as depressed, if they're happier, if they have greater well-being, maybe they take better care of themselves. Maybe they're taking better care of themselves. And I thought, well, maybe I ought to look at their physical health as well. And then that actually resulted in a series of studies showing that those persons who were more religious lived longer, spent less time in the hospital, had lower blood pressure, had less cardiac problems, had better immune functioning, and one study after the other showing that religious people were just healthier, happier, lived longer, and basically were more productive as members of the community.
Fascinating. Now, how was the Duke Center for Spirituality, Theology, and Health founded?
Well, what I did was when I was getting interested in this in 1995, I developed a program on religion, health, and aging. So that was 1995. And then in 1998, I got a grant from the Templeton Foundation to start a Center for Religion, Spirituality, and Health. And so I continued with that. I continued doing that for a while, and then I got another grant from the foundation to support a new center that we renamed Center for Spirituality, Theology, and Health. So I've been directing that center since about 2005, and it's the center is all about training people to do research, getting colleagues at Duke together to actually do research, and summarize and try to make sense of what other people are finding in the field, in the growing field, it's become a field now, of religion, spirituality, and health, and helping to interpret what those findings mean for people out in the community and, for other academic colleagues. So that's what kind of the center does now.
Duke has a tradition of I think, accepting open-minded positions on things. I remember the studies on ESP back in the 60s.
Oh yeah, they have the Rhine Center.
Correct.
Rhine
Dr.
Center
Rhine.
hadn't been here at Duke for 20 or 30 years. Now it's moved off campus now, but I think it's still there.
So Duke is actually a mecca for open-minded thinking and approaching things with a out-of-the-box sort of approach.
Duke was very much so that way, especially if there was any hope for money. Money. See, Duke is interested largely in money. So here's a young guy who has connected with the Templeton Foundation that's got lots of money, and they're funding him. So that was, I think, the most convincing aspect of Duke. Now, that's kind of negative, and I shouldn't really talk that way about my institution. But so I do have to say that even before there was any money involved, I'd been at Duke since 1986, and Templeton really didn't fund us until 1998. So there was about 10 years there where I had no funding support, and Duke was pretty supportive. At least they didn't discourage me. See, a lot of places I've been before were discouraging. They said, well, learn the research methods, do your studies, design them, and we'll see what happens. So they were pretty open-minded, actually. I had many people, especially in the Center for Aging, that were very supportive to what I was doing, even initially. I mean, Linda George, Harvey Cohen, Dan Blazer, these were the leading people in the world on aging. And these individuals, they agreed to participate in my research and be co-authors with me and place their reputation on the line in these papers. So I do have to say, yes, money is a big issue, and that's why I'm probably still here at Duke, is because I've been very successful in raising grant funding. But even before that, as I'm thinking back, it was a supportive and open-minded place. You were right.
Absolutely. Was the holistic movement, especially that came up in the late 80s and 90s, was that a motivating factor for a lot of people to get involved in this work?
I don't know, because I think the holistic movement was more a clinical kind of movement. I was always focused dead center on research and science, because that was what I was doing. And, I was interested in how you apply it to clinical practice, and eventually wrote several books on that. But, I was mainly interested in looking at these connections to see whether there was any relationship and trying to understand how that relationship was coming about. That was my focus. I was really looking at the mechanisms and trying to understand why and how do people who are more religious, why are they doing better?
Yes. Now, the concept of spirituality and science, someone once said that on a certain day, I always thought this was Einstein, and I can't find attribution for it, but said that the crossroads of spirituality and science would meet. And on that day, we would know, quote unquote, the mind of God. How does that relate to the work that you do?
Well, I think what science is showing is all of this, whether God exists or not, is all a matter of faith. There's no proving that God exists or that prayer heals or whatever. That does depend on faith. And if you had evidence for it, you wouldn't call it faith. But what's I believe that science is now uncovering, and I'm not the first person who said this. I think Isaac Newton said it about 400 years ago. Science is now discovering how God works. That God has allowed the methods of science, really because of his love for humans and wanting to share some of, and again, these thoughts are all my opinions and not based on science, wanting to share how the world works. And the incredible majesty of creation, of nature. I mean, it is pretty spectacular. If there's ever any evidence that God exists, I mean, it's got to be nature. I mean, nature is just incredible. You look at the sky on a clear, dark night, and look at the stars, the moon, or go into the mountains on a beautiful spring day and look at the flowers. I mean, it just seems like it'd be pretty amazing if all of this was just random.
Dr. Koenig, I couldn't agree with you more. My guest, Dr. Harold Koenig, author of the books The Healing Power of Faith and his latest book, You Are My Beloved, Really? And we'll be back with more of Dr. Koenig after these messages on the OMTimes radio network.
This is OTR-FM, part of the IOM radio network.
Are you in an interfaith relationship and thinking of getting married? For 18 years, Reverend Lori Sue Brockway has been creating personalized, loving, and romantic ceremonies for couples of all faiths and cultural backgrounds. Reverend Lori Sue's sensitivity to the needs of interfaith couples is reflected in the compassionate and inclusive way she addresses the concerns of parents and families. Reverend Lori Sue is also the author of several best-selling books on interfaith weddings and wedding vows. Selected as one of the top interfaith officiants by New York Magazine, Reverend Lori Sue serves couples in the New York metropolitan area and beyond. Find out more at her website, yourinterfaithwedding.com.
Have you ever wondered how to change your love paradigm? The secret key is finding a love partnership, not just a regular connection. How do you find these? Through conscious relationships. Ascending Hearts Dating is a dating site for people like you that believes in second chances and a different type of spiritual connection. Try Ascending Hearts for free today at ascendinghearts.com and change your love paradigm. Ascending Hearts, the premier dating community for the spiritually awake.
And we're back on Destination Unlimited. My guest this afternoon, Dr. Harold Koenig. Dr. Koenig, let me ask you a question about faith healing. There have been studies and reports years ago about the power of prayer in healing. I'm not talking about people praying for themselves or being prayed for in person, but people being prayed for remotely. And in those tests, I recall that some people were not prayed for in a control group, some people were prayed for in the other group. And that at the time, there were some interesting outcomes, and then later those outcomes were questioned. What's your knowledge on this, and what's your experience with it?
Well, you're referring to the intercessory prayer studies. That the first one was actually in the mid-1980s at San Francisco General by Dr. Byrd, Dr. B-Y-R-D. And in fact, I was there doing my psychiatry, or not my medical school rotation. It was actually in psychiatry around the time that he was doing these studies. But he did a randomized, double-blinded, controlled study where he had half of the patients in the intensive care unit or coronary care unit. Half of them got prayed for. They didn't know about it. People who were praying for them didn't know these people, and the other half didn't get prayer. And he compared the two groups and found that, lo and behold, those who were getting the double-blinded prayer did better than the group that was not getting the double-blinded prayer. And so that started then a series of maybe 25 different studies that culminated in the Harvard multi-site study that I was actually part of the advisory group of Herbert Benson, who was the lead investigator, where they did 1,800 people who were undergoing open heart surgery, coronary artery bypass grafting, and they randomized them 900 to intercessory prayer, 9 to no prayer, and half of the ones in the intercessory prayer group who were getting the prayer were told that they were getting the prayer. So they followed these people for a period of time, and they looked at the outcomes, and they found, that in fact the group getting the intercessory prayer they did no better than the group that was getting no prayer, and the group that was told they were getting the intercessory prayer, they did worse. They did worse. In fact, the cover of Newsweek that time, it came out in the American Heart Journal in 2006. It was, "Please don't pray for me." That was, and that was actually the last study now that has been done looking at this. Duke did a study, it was published in The Lancet. Prior to that, found no difference between prayed for and non-prayed for. Since the beginning of doing these studies, I have had a negative kind of view towards those studies. One reason is because, I don't know, if they did find a difference, first of all, people who are not getting, in the control group, they're getting prayer. I mean, nobody goes into the intensive care unit if somebody's not praying for them. I can tell you that.
Absolutely.
They're getting prayer by family members. They're praying for themselves, the nurses, whatever. They're getting a lot of prayer. So now it's not a matter of, prayer versus no prayer. Now it's a matter of additional prayer. Now that becomes a little bit spooky because, my understanding, again, this is all based on my own opinion and belief. My understanding of God is that God is much bigger than that. Mm-hmm. It's almost like you put 50 cents in the Coke machine and you get a certain size Coke. And if you put $1, you get double the Coke. You get twice as much Coke. God is not like that, I don't think. I don't think he's a quantitative God. I don't think he's like part of the natural world. I mean, he is part of the natural world, but he's a lot bigger than this natural world. He doesn't operate like this. God may not answer the prayer right during the study period. Maybe he wants to heal people after the study is over. They only followed him up, I think, for 3 or 6 months. Mm-hmm. Maybe after a year he wants to heal them. So, there are all sorts of, and scientifically are there absolutely no grounds for there being any effect. Mm-hmm. So I'm not excited about these studies.
Now, have you investigated laying on of hands and other spiritual healing modalities?
I have not looked at it, but I am aware of some research that has done that. And it is interesting. I think when you're with a person and you're actually laying hands on them and praying, then I think you can find something. I think there could very well be a significant good effect. I can't really quote you a study. I really don't know of a study that's shown that, but I would imagine it would be, and you could explain it through psychological, social kinds of mechanisms. So that would be perfectly scientifically valid to do a study like that. And I think there'd be some great finding if someone did it, but I'm just not aware of anything being published on the topic at this time.
Now, in your book, The Healing Power of Faith, you document some of the Duke Center's groundbreaking findings. Please share some of those with us.
Well, let me start kind of in reverse here. We recently found that people who are more religious, we were studying caregivers, stressed out caregivers, actually had longer telomeres when we assessed them. So telomeres are part of the DNA strand or chromosome. Actually, the chromosome, right at the end of the chromosome, there's a telomere. And it's kind of a biological clock within the cell, because as the cell gets older and as cells divide, their telomeres shorten. And once the telomere is a certain critical length, the cell dies, the organism and the organ deteriorates, and the person dies. So it's kind of it's a little indicator of aging and of lifespan. And so what we found, we were trying to figure out, why is it that religious people tend to live longer? And we thought one of the mechanisms might be that they have longer telomeres. And so what this study found was that, yes, those who are more religious seem to have longer telomeres. And then a month later, that was replicated by colleagues in a much larger study, finding again that those who are more religious tended to have longer telomeres. Mm. And that could help to explain why those individuals are living longer. So that's been, some of the recent studies. And I tell you that some of the best work within just the last 2 months is coming out of the Harvard School of Public Health. They're up there in Boston. They are finding remarkable, huge numbers of people they've been following. The nurses' health study. This is 90,000 women who are being followed. They've been followed for about 20 years, 15 to 20 years. And they're showing that those who are attending religious services are living longer. They're about 30% less likely to die during the follow-up period, independent of everything. I mean, they controlled for statistically for everything. This is the Harvard School of Public Health. They have statisticians that are part of the authorship of this study that did the analyses. These guys don't do the analyses. They invent new analyses that are then used by other people. They are so skilled, so brilliant, and all of that skill, all of that talent has been incorporated in these huge studies showing that religious people live longer, considerably longer. Not only that, but the rate of suicide in that group, in those women who are attending weekly, is nearly 7 times lower than those who are not attending religious services. So that's another finding just within the past month or two. In JAMA, this is the top medical journal in the world, coming out. And so in any case, I'm just kind of excited that a lot of this work that, I was struggling with doing on limited funding support back in the 80s and 90s, that here's the Harvard School of Public Health in 2016 coming out with these dramatic findings indicating that religious people are healthier and happier and not as depressed and don't commit suicide as often, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I wonder if that study would be something that would provide the impetus for medical institutions to provide some type of interfaith gathering for nursing staff and doctor staff and aid staff to participate in, to encourage this communion and encourage them to participate, as opposed to those who just have their own specific faith-based weekly attendance.
I couldn't agree with you more. Victor. In fact, we are now doing a study with the Adventist Health System. Adventist Health System is the largest Protestant healthcare system in the United States, probably the world. And we're actually looking at spiritual care teams being formed on an outpatient basis in physician offices, outpatient offices, and them, assessing for spiritual needs, and then connecting patients, who say they have spiritual needs, with someone who can address those needs, someone who's skilled in addressing the complex spiritual needs that come up when people get sick and have these terrible diagnoses that affect their disability and their independence. And so this is a very exciting move, I think, and a step into actually getting some of this into clinical practice. Because I like you said, wouldn't it be great if that there was like an inter-religious service that people could attend, or in which they could praise God or praise or meditate or whatever, I think that'd be great. I think it'd make a difference. And
Absolutely.
I'd love to study it, Victor. I'd love to do a research study.
Absolutely. My wife and I were both served as chaplains for the Red Cross after 9/11, and after each shift that we served on, we had I guess they called it a decompression session, where we all would get together for a half an hour and just discuss all of the things we had experienced and the trauma that people had shared with us, and a lot of the pain and anguish that people had shared with us, and give us an opportunity to have this camaraderie together so that we could all process and diffuse the experience that we had just had. And it was a very, very wonderful experience.
That's terrific, Victor. And, we're having the nurses and the physicians identify or screen for spiritual needs, but we're having the chaplains who are trained on how to address those needs. Because, doctors and nurses don't have time, and they're not trained to address these complex issues that people face when they're traumatized. So they need to refer them to someone with the training. And so chaplains play a critical role in this.
Absolutely. Our guest is Dr. Harold Koenig. He's the author of the books The Healing Power of Faith and his latest You Are My Beloved Really, which we'll talk about when we come back after these brief messages on Destination Unlimited on the OMTimes Radio Network.
The number one reason girls drop out of school in sub-Saharan Africa is lack of access to feminine hygiene products. The Pads for Schoolgirls Project, an outreach of Humanity Healing International, is changing this paradigm by setting up sewing programs at schools, teaching girls a vocational skill, while producing the reusable pads that help keep them attending classes. The girls pay it forward by making and giving pad kits to other girls in need. To learn more, visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Hello, I'm Miriam Knight of New Consciousness Review, inviting you to my new show where I interview the rising stars of the conscious awakening. We'll explore the many faces of consciousness and action and intriguing perspectives on life, the universe, and everything in between. Join us each Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern on the Rising Stars Show.
And we're back on Destination Unlimited. My guest this afternoon is Dr. Harold Koenig. Dr. Koenig, in preparation for our interview, you mentioned that you were currently reading some of the Hindu scriptures. Eastern philosophy embraced the mind-body-spirit connection long before the West began embracing it. Have you gained any insights from the Upanishads or the Bhagavad Gita?
Well, I haven't. I'm saving the Bhagavad Gita for after I get through the Upanishads. But, from the Upanishads, everything is all one.
Absolutely.
The body is, the mind, the breath, the speech is all, part of, it's just all part of the one and part of Brahman, as I understand it. My perspective is more a personal Brahman from more with personal attributes. And so, I'm getting to the Bhagavad Gita, which really kind of emphasizes that with the coming of Lord Krishna being, a Brahman having come to earth to God coming to earth to guide his people.
No accident in the stories of Hinduism and the Abrahamic religions and Christianity. There's no accident because, in essence, we know that it comes from the same source. That's my belief. Absolutely. Now, your new book is called "You Are My Beloved, Really?" with a question mark, and I believe this is a true gift. It's a treatise on questions that people of every faith and people of no faith have asked since we've had the ability to ask. What prompted you to write this book?
Well, Victor, I've been caring for patients as a psychiatrist, and I do geriatric psychiatry right now. And I have run into so many patients. But by the time they get to see me, I'm at Duke Medical Center, they have got a lot of problems. All of the, they've been treated in the community. It hasn't worked. And a lot of these people have chronic pain, multiple medical problems. They're developing dementia, or they're depressed or psychotic. And I have to deal with their caregivers. And I've come to know and really to love some of these patients far more so than they're not just patients to me. They're not just patients. And I've so wanted to help them and give them something of myself. And for me, my spiritual religious transformation that, it's just my experience, but for me, it was 30 years ago, and it changed my life. It changed my life, and my life is still changed. And, I want to be able to give this to my patients because I feel like it will help them. I've had chronic pain syndrome and other problems, for all of these 30 years. I have to, when I travel in a wheelchair. I'm much healthier for some reason, much healthier just in the last year or two. And I really can't figure out that other than, maybe prayer. But, so this book kind of captures everything that I've learned as a psychiatrist, as a researcher, just as a person going through bad experiences like everybody else is going through, good and bad experiences. And I've tried to compact this into this tiny book that explains what I think people, a book that I plan on reading as a devotional for the rest of my life as well, because I'm not sure that I can add to this anymore. It's just everything that I've learned in my life is in this little book on how to live a happy, holy, healthy life. And one of the major, it was the patients initially, but then we started to engage people with PTSD. In fact, our soldiers and our veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder. And I've been doing research with this population now for about 2 to 3 years, and we have developed a treatment for what's called moral injury. It's called spiritually oriented cognitive processing therapy. Now, cognitive processing therapy is a type of psychotherapy that is used to treat active duty military and veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder that results from their combat experiences and various, kinds of horrific experiences that people go through during war. Now, part of this post-traumatic stress disorder involves moral injury. Moral injury is the kinds of feelings that soldiers, veterans, have when they do things that transgress their moral code. Even if they're just doing their duty, even if they're just shooting the enemy, killing the enemy, it's their duty to do that. It has consequences. It has consequences. It affects them morally. And that is where we think a lot of the trauma lies, and is one of the reasons why post-traumatic stress disorder doesn't respond to treatment very well. I mean, about probably 70% of people with PTSD don't really get all that better. And it follows them into their later years, into their, when they get sick, usually they try to suppress all this trauma. But then when they get sick and they lose their job and they can't work, then it comes back. So we are targeting this moral injury, and the book is designed for this intervention. Actually, 2 chapters per week in a series of 12 weeks. Actually, it's 6 weeks. It's 2 chapters per session. It ends up 24 chapters over 6 weeks. It's actually part of this spiritually oriented cognitive processing therapy that is targeting moral injury. So that's kind of how it started.
It is an amazing work, and I have to say for our listeners that you have to get this book. if you have any inkling whatsoever, any desire to understand how God is viewed by every major world religion, and to find the true likeness and not the differences, because there are, when you get to the foundational works, there are no differences. We all have the same fears, we all have the same desires, we all have the same needs, and Dr. Koenig's book so beautifully addresses this. And if you strip away what I refer to as the man-made designation on top of religion, the stuff that people use for control and power, and get to the essence of what our relationship is with each other and with our Creator, this book will touch you in ways that you will not believe. And I have to share with you, Dr. Koenig, that I had the privilege of attending the New Seminary of New York back in the 90s. And my teacher was a wonderful man by the name of Rabbi Joseph Gelberman. He was the founder of the school. And he touched upon 2 points in his book, or rather you touched upon a couple of points in your book that he actually expressed to us back in the 90s. One of the things he talked about, which you discuss, is the word sin in Hebrew means an archer misses the mark when he shoots the arrow at the target. What a wonderful way of looking at sin. Would you want to expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, really, we're all sinning because we're not just doing everything perfectly, and nobody can do that. And so, originally, as you said, you really beautifully said, sin was simply people missing the mark, the ideal mark that God has for every person to be targeting. And we just, we have these powerful human, natural human emotions that and there are just temptations all over the place that take the arrow off the mark. And God is, because of his love for us, is trying to help us, trying to guide us, hit the mark that is really our fullest, our true nature, our true being, where there is peace and joy, and a sense that we are the beloved. And really, that's it. But, I think that I know Rabbi Gelderman. I think we even had him at Duke at one year.
It's very possible, yes. He passed away a few years ago, but it's absolutely possible that you have met him. And another thing he used to say in his classes, he used to tell us that he would wake up in the morning. He was in his late 80s, early 90s when I attended the school. And he would say, I wake up in the morning and I feel pain in my legs. And I say, thank you, God. And people say to him, why do you say thank you, God, for feeling pain? He says, because I feel pain, I know I'm alive. And as long as I'm alive, there are things that I can do in life. And if I were dead, I couldn't do anything anyway. So it was a wonderful teaching and something that you also share in this wonderful book of yours, You Are My Beloved, Really.
Oh, that's a neat story.
Absolutely.
It's so true. I hope that I live a long life, because I really want to be able to communicate this message, really across the world. I have really so many opportunities, Victor, to be able to share this with the Middle East. I go to Saudi Arabia every year. I have colleagues there. I do research there. I'm on the faculty there in Jeddah. They're on the Red Sea. And, I do lots of research with them, study religion. I go to China periodically. I've got colleagues there in Western China. Actually, it's a big Muslim community there in Western China, and doing research with Chinese researchers and understanding the role that faith plays in the health of the Chinese people. Just returned from Poland, where there's a European meeting on religion, spirituality, and health. And so there's so much interest in this topic, and so much happening in the world that needs religion that is conveying the essential point that God loves all of the 7 billion people on this earth, and all are his favored.
And the lesson that we should learn from that is, and it's the simplest lesson of all, love one another. That's really what it comes down to. Take care of people. Do the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I mean, it's so simple.
It is so simple, and, it's so hard to do. It's so hard to maintain it, to continue to do it, because, loving we almost have to have God's love in us in order for us to truly love others unconditionally. That's the thing. Natural love is kind of a negotiation. You do for me, I do for you. But if you stop doing for me, I stop doing for you. It's conditional. But this love that God offers is not. It's not conditional. Now, there are some conditions for us to experience that love. If you go about hurting other people, no, you're not going to experience God's love, because he loves that other person too.
Absolutely.
Just like he loves you.
Absolutely. A beautiful message. Dr. Harold Koenig. His newest book is called You Are My Beloved, Really. It is a must-read. Folks, go out and get it. This is a book that will absolutely change your life, I promise you. Dr. Koenig, please tell our listeners where they can find out more about you.
Well, we have a center, and it's our Duke Center. All you have to do is go to Google and put in Duke Spirituality and Health, and you'll come up with our center. And there's a lot of information on that center website that's for free, that you can access it. My new book, You Are My Beloved, that one's on Amazon.com. So all you got to do is put in Koenig, Harold Koenig, Koenig, and You Are My Beloved, and it ought to pop up. So happy reading, and and come to our website. Lots of exciting research is up there, and videos and everything.
Dr. Koenig, thank you so much for granting us your wisdom and your experience on Destination Unlimited this week. I'm Victor the Voice Furman. Thank you for joining us on Destination Unlimited, and have a great week, everyone.